Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol character spotlight. Today, we are taking a look at the Ant-Man Scott Lang. We don't have a Hank Pym version yet, maybe soon. But yeah, so we're just going to go ahead and get right into him. Now, this one's going to be a little weird to kind of go through. We can't go our normal format here because he's kind of got two sides to his card here. So we'll figure that out. But his defensive stats stay mostly the same on either side. So he is 3-2-3, so a little light on the energy defensively, but 3 on physical and mystic, which is relatively average for his threat of 3. And then he's got 5 stamina. So looking a little squishy on the energy side, but we'll cover that in a second. So I guess we'll start by looking at his normal side here. So Ant-Man is a size 2 when he's in his normal size, and he is a medium mover, and he has 2 attacks. He has Pym Particle Punch, so this is a range 2 4 dice physical attack. It is a builder, so he's going to gain power equal to the damage dealt, which on 4 dice isn't the most consistent thing in the world, but still does average 1 damage against most targets. After this attack is resolved, he may transform into Ant-Man Tiny. If it transforms, it drops all objective tokens it is holding before transforming. So that's really, really important, is that his transformation here is going to make him drop any objectives that he's holding, and we'll see um, that that's going to be true for every way he can transform from normal to small. When he's small, he basically can never touch objectives. I mean, he can contest them just fine, but he can't hold them. Then his next attack here is his Spender. This is a 4-cost Spender. It's called Bullet Ant Barrage. It's a beam 3. It's going to be throwing 7 dice, and if the attack deals damage after the attack is resolved, the target character will be poisoned and stunned. So that's actually a really, really solid beam. It's a tiny bit expensive, not for what it does, just in general, considering that so far the only builder we've seen is a 4-dice one. So it can be a little hard to get him up to the power to do that too often, but it is a really powerful beam. I mean, 7 dice with poison and stun, and as we're going to see in a minute, this model has a lot of mobility to really help you line up those beams. So it can do a lot and really hit your opponent's power if you do some okay, if you do at least 1 damage to every target. So that's solid, and then we're going to go into his superpowers here. So he only has 2 superpowers. He has change size. It's going to cost him 1. It makes him drop all objectives once again, and then he transforms into Ant-Man Tiny. And then, of course, the change size superpower can only be used once per turn. Note that he does have the change size superpower on both sides, but he can only use it once, so he can't go into Tiny and then back into Big using the superpower. That's the same superpower. So, or at least mostly the same, because obviously on the small side it doesn't have to specify he drops objectives. Anyways, the next part here is Pym Particle Control. This is a 1-cost reactive ability. When this character is targeted by an enemy attack or would suffer a collision, you may use this superpower. He drops all objectives he is holding, and then he transforms into Ant-Man Tiny before the attack or collision continues. So that's important because as we're going to see, he has a little bit more defensive tech on his flip side. But really, really important to note with this is that by the time you get to using this superpower to transform, putting yourself into, well, spoiler alert, he has stealth on the tiny side. So putting yourself into stealth range or out of range of their attack doesn't actually end the attack at this point because you've already been selected as the target and it doesn't specify that it does that. So this is just something that's used to get your defensive tech online or maybe to put you into tiny mode for your own turn. But really importantly, you can't use this to completely get out of attacks. It doesn't recheck that stuff, so you still are the target regardless of the original range of the attack or anything like that. Anyways, we're going to go into tiny mode, and we'll notice he goes down to size 1. He's one of very, very few size 1 characters in the game. What's fun about that is it means you can hide behind a car, and because of the way line of sight in this game works, you can still see anyone who's size 2 or bigger over that car, and they can't see you. So that can be really, really fun. The unfortunate part for Ant-Man here is his only attack is range 1, so that doesn't really help him all that much. But being invisible behind a car is still valuable if you just need him to kind of run away for a little bit. But yeah, so he's only size 1 and he moves small, so he's definitely a little bit slower, or at least you would think he is, but we'll get into that. Next, he has the ant-sized uppercut. This is his only attack on this side. It is a builder. It costs him 0 power. Notably, it is range 1, so he has to be real close to be able to use this attack. but it is throw 6 dice, which for a 3 threat is a lot of dice on a builder. And as we were mentioning earlier, he has one thing that he does like to spend power on, because it is a very, very solid beam if you can get a couple good targets under there. So having a 6 dice builder can really help him get to that a little faster. However, after the attack is resolved, he does transform back into normal size, so you're not super often going to be able to use this twice, although we'll talk about that as well. He has the change size superpower here as well. This time it doesn't make him drop any objectives because he would have dropped them when he went tiny anyways. But he changes into normal size, and also once per turn. Does cost him 1 on either side to do that. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but yeah, just a small little tax. But then the really powerful ability he has comes in here, which is Hitch a Ride. This is a 0 cost superpower. Once per turn, place this character within 3 of its current position, which is really, really good. The range 3 is a fairly large tool when you're doing a place off of it. Anyone who's played webs and has access to stuff like web swing knows how valuable a range 3 place can be. And yeah, this is really, really powerful. We'll talk about some of his turn 1 plays and stuff in a minute, and the kind of rude things you can do with this. But also between that range 3 place and the transform ranges, this model is just really good at covering a lot of ground for a very small amount of power, which, like I mentioned earlier, really helps you line up those beams. If you're transforming, which is already giving you range 1 places, and then you get a free range 3 place, and then you're transforming again by using the ant-sized uppercut, now you've been able to place yourself a very large distance without doing a single move action, and ideally your bullet ant barrage is well online. So that's really important to note there. He does have stealth when he's tiny, so that's a useful thing to kind of help keep him alive. Again, it doesn't work if you try to change size into like out of stealth range, but it does work to avoid perhaps a double tap sort of thing. And then he has tiny superhero. He may reroll any number of defense or dodge dice, which is really nice. Not that many things do dodge dice, but in addition, he cannot hold objective tokens. So note he can still interact with them, so he can't try to pick up anything, but he can interact with secures, and he can still contest secures, no problem. So yeah, let's kind of go over, let's unpack this a little bit, because Ant-Man has a lot of text here. So first of all, when he's in his tiny mode, which is really, really easy for him to be, and it costs him 1 power to transform into tiny mode as a reaction to an attack or just on his turn. So when he's in tiny mode, he's going to have full rerolls on defense or dodge. So those 2 dice suddenly look a lot better. They're still not great. It's still only 2 dice, and if you roll skulls, that really sucks, but it helps a lot. And then looking at some of his other stats here, 3 dice full rerolls on physical and mystic, that's actually pretty solid. Like that's very, very good and should average at least 1 higher on both of them. So that's quite effective. That should be a very, very powerful defensive ability for him. And then the fact that it affects dodges as well is just kind of icing on the cake. That's really, really nice when stuff gets thrown at him. So yeah, I think when he's able to be in that tiny form, as long as you can keep him at least 1 power to make sure he can go tiny, or just end his turn in tiny mode, that's really useful. Do note though that the tiny ant-sized uppercut forces you to transform back. It's not a May ability here, so you have to go back to normal size after you use that attack. So you can't willingly stay in tiny form, even if you whiffed the builder and you don't have any power to put yourself back. That's unfortunate. You're now leaving yourself vulnerable, especially to energy attacks. So you do want to be mindful of some of the risks that could come in there if you're relying on that builder to gain you power. Now, immediately after saying that, I'm going to talk about one of his kind of turn 1 things he can do that relies on that builder to gain him power. Um, relies on that builder to gain him power for survivability into the next round. So if you're playing on a B or F shape, which would be something like Infinity Formula or Scoundrels, and note that I am kind of leaning towards secures on this one for very specific reason. Um, if you're playing on Infinity Formula or Scoundrels, on turn 1, Ant-Man is capable, or round 1 I should say, because if you're doing this turn 1, you're asking for him to be punched. But let's say your opponent, they moved one of their models to the relative safety of a back B or F point. Those are usually, especially if they're on the further back part of it, those are usually considered fairly safe spots to land. Um, So a lot of the times people will put kind of their squishier models on those objectives. They don't want them going for the midline points yet unless they have a safe grab with them. But a safe grab, typically, a lot of the times, they'll move them back towards one of the back Bs anyways. So a lot of squishier models tend to hang out there. And if you can deploy Ant-Man pretty much perfectly lined up with them, you don't need to be 100%. I think there's a little bit of leeway, but lined up with the back B or I guess your own B or F point, um, and across from a relatively squishy model that you expect to land on that point, Ant-Man is capable of, for one power, the one power that he gets during the power phase, he can change size, then he can hit, or sorry, first things first, he has to move. You want to move while you're in the normal size because medium move versus small move, obviously that's just better. He's the same size base, so that doesn't come into play here, but medium move is more distance, and you'll need that to pull this off. So you're going to do the medium move, then you're going to transform, which is going to give you basically a range one place, and you want to use the full distance of that if you can. Obviously, sometimes terrain will kind of get in the way here, and that can really mess up Ant-Man's turn if you get poor landing zones for these things. So you do want to kind of try and eyeball it out while you're deploying. Make sure he's going to be able to get to the types of places you want him to be able to get. Um, but then he can transform, get that range one place, then do the hitch a ride, which is a range three place, and that should land him pretty much right on their back B or F point, which puts him within range one of anyone who's contesting that point. So then he can use the ant-sized uppercut turn or round one, getting a 6 dice builder into an opponent's back point. And if you can make it happen on a back point where they only have one model contesting it, I mean, the odds you're going to take them out with a 6 dice punch are not amazing most of the time. But if it happens, more power to you. That's really good. But if it doesn't happen, you still put a solid attack into a model sitting on a back point, and you've put a relatively defensive model if you built at least one power from this because you can transform back into tiny superhero. Um, you have the full rerolls, so you're a relatively bulky model sitting on your opponent's back point, contesting your opponent's back point, so hopefully denying them a point if they didn't have two models back there. And if they do, you have to really weigh your options on whether or not it's actually worth it to go for this. Sometimes it still is for the extra attrition plays, sometimes it isn't. But you're able to put a bulky model on your opponent's back point round one, and that's really, really good. And if you get super lucky, you can spike out a model, especially if it's like a two threat. There you have a little bit higher chance of actually just one tapping something. So yeah, I think Ant-Man has probably one of the most hilariously fun opening plays in the game. It's a little dicey. You are just kind of rolling in with a big 6 dice punch, and if that does nothing and you can't change size, now you're leaving Ant-Man very, very exposed on the back point. So it can be a little dicey, but it is a super fun play. So yeah, I just figured I'd mention that because I think that's one of the more popular kind of opening plays with Ant-Man. And of course, this works on the middle line as well. So if they didn't safe grab, he can punish pretty well there. I'm actually not 100% sure on this, so don't quote me, but he might not even need to do the move action for that. He might be able to double tap the middle line with the range one place from the transform followed by the hitch and ride. But once again, don't quote me on that one. So going into his affiliations and things, he's only a part of one affiliation, and that is Avengers. So Avengers, obviously, as we know, has 4 leaders at this point, and Ant-Man is one of the few characters in the game who gets absolutely nothing from Steve Rogers' leadership, which I always find funny because he's an Avenger and he's one of the very few characters that doesn't benefit. So Steve Rogers' leadership, for those unaware, is just reduce the power of the first superpower used every turn by 1 to a minimum of 1, but every superpower Ant-Man has costs either 1 or 0, so it does absolutely nothing there. That said, he's still just a solid affiliated model, so it can be worth considering him there, but he really doesn't get much from Steve, especially since he likes to go a lot further ahead than Steve does, so he's not really going to benefit from having a bodyguard sitting around either. But the other leaderships are slightly more useful for him. We're not going to talk too much about Hulkbuster's because unfortunately Hulkbuster's leadership just isn't the greatest. But Steve Rogers first, or Captain America First Avenger and Sam Wilson, I think are both relatively solid leaderships for Ant-Man. Sam Wilson Ant-Man fits the bill for very, very well. He's a relatively bulky 3 threat, so you can still squeeze in a lot of models. So when he or other models die, he or other models that are mostly relatively bulky 3 or maybe the odd 4 threat are going to be able to make free small advances and heal a little bit. While Ant-Man doesn't really need the help with the mobility, the healing is nice, and because you are throwing Ant-Man right into your opponent's face, there's a pretty reasonable chance he's going to go down relatively early into round 2. So that at least gives you that leadership proc, which allows some of your other models to kind of get back into the fight a little bit sooner. So you can kind of get some vengeance for him relatively early, which is nice. And if he lives, great. He lives. He's a bulky, annoying model on your opponent's back point, and because he's bulky, if your opponent ends up taking out anything else, then you can heal him up a little bit too. So he's pretty good there. I really like him with Sam. I think First Avenger he can work pretty well as well. So the First Avenger leadership is during the modified dice step, you can pay 1 power. If you have at least 1 hit in the attack roll, you can change one of your other results to, or one of your other dice to any result. Um, that's solid. That's a very generically useful leadership. Ant-Man doesn't really have any triggers that he's fishing for on his card. He has no, wild triggers or anything like that. It might help you push through the odd bit of damage on Bold Ant Barrage, or, either of your builders, which doesn't hurt at all. But one of the reasons why I think it's okay for Ant-Man is just because he doesn't have all that much he wants to spend power on outside of that spender attack. So spending the odd 1 or 2 here just to push through an extra point of damage really doesn't feel that bad for him, especially since the attack he's going to be making most of the time is a builder attack. So that's another thing I should probably mention that's really fun you can do with Ant-Man is if you can start the turn tiny because I don't know, your opponent punched you and you were able to pin particle control and be tiny when his turn starts. You can ant-sized uppercut, which automatically transforms you back into normal size, but you haven't actually used the change size superpower yet, so you can immediately change back into tiny. So you can throw that 6 dice or twice, which is well above the weight class of most 6 threats for what 1 power is what we've spent to do this. I guess 2 if you count the pin particle control. So that's really, really good. And of course, you still have access to hitch a ride and all of that stuff in there. Of course, keep in mind that once again, if these builders aren't getting you anything, which you're throwing 2 6 dicers, so I hope they are, but if they're not getting you anything, you are giving up your defensive tech. But at the end of the day, this model is going to be a little dicey when it comes to stuff like that, so you just kind of got to accept that and, be conscious of the risk when you're making it. But yeah, that is all of the leaders in Avengers. I don't think many of the like models specifically really give him all that much in the way of synergy. I think anyone who can give him access to rerolls, something like Invincible Iron Man, could be really nice for him. Or just really any of the Tony Starks playing something like Stark Armory to give him some extra dice. That could be nice for him. I don't think it's super necessary, but he doesn't hate it at all. Additionally, if you're kind of trying to take advantage of that bulk stuff, that can hand out shocks. So, I mean, there's not too much of that in Avengers, but like Thor can hand out a shock relatively easily. And wow, is Thor the only one? That's interesting. Never thought about that before, but yeah, he might be the only one. That's weird. Um, but yeah, so there's a little bit of synergy with a couple models, but nothing too major and specific. So yeah, really just anything that can kind of help keep him online and keep him, hitting a little bit more consistently. Like I said, stuff like Stark with or new Tony, the one that comes in the new core box, because there's 3 Starks, so that really doesn't help. With Jarvis, just helping him re-roll some dice and stuff like that. That can be relatively solid, but yeah, there's not too much in the way of specific synergies. Going into tactics cards, and of course I clicked the wrong button there. Going into tactics cards, he only has 1 tactics card to his name. It is the Pim Particles tactics card. So Ant-Man or Wasp can spend 2 power to play this card, and that is kind of a synergy with Wasp there, is by having both of them, your opponent doesn't know which side to kind of expect it from, especially if they're deployed on, relatively opposite sides of the board. They're also just both very mobile models, so they can very easily be anywhere they want to be on the board. But choose another allied character within range 3 of this character, then choose an interactive terrain feature of size 3 or less within range 3 of the chosen character. This is wordy. The chosen character then throws it medium. So Ant-Man or Wasp are playing the card, but neither of them are actually doing throw. They're picking a character within range 3, which is pretty generous, and with all the mobility Ant-Man and Wasp have, that allows them to pick many of the members on your team. Um, then that character is going to pick a size 3 terrain within 3 of them, and they're going to throw it medium. This is a really, really good terrain throw card. I don't think it's necessarily an auto include if you're bringing Ant-Man or anything like that. Personally, I've actually yet to try it out myself, but I do think it's a very solid card. Having that random terrain throw on, just a 2 cost card, which, as we've already kind of established, Ant-Man doesn't have a crazy amount of things he's trying to spend power on. So, if you don't have good beams lined up and stuff, it can definitely be worth using this card. And a size 3 terrain throw is nothing to scoff at. That can do a lot of damage. I mean, it can do 4 damage. So that's quite good. And yeah, it's definitely worth having in your back pocket and just kind of making your opponent be at least wary that this is going to come up. I'd be cautious running it as your only terrain throw in the list because obviously, as we've seen, Ant-Man doesn't have one on his own card. Because then they're just going to brace this, and that's the very obvious use of their brace. So be somewhat mindful of that. Make sure you have at least one other because you kind of want to chase out the brace before you burn this card since it is a relatively large terrain throw. That said, if you also have like a Hulk or something, then you're doing size 4 throws anyways. So that's fine. But yeah, I think it's a solid card and it's definitely worth considering bringing if you're bringing Ant-Man anyways. Going into other affiliations, I think one thing you really kind of want to avoid, like they're not going to be bad for him, but they're not necessarily great for him, are leaderships that are kind of focused around power. That said, stuff that focuses on healing, so stuff like Emma Frost, not bad at all because you're getting the extra power, which you don't care that much about. Although it does make the turn one play a little less risky, but more importantly, you're also going to be able to heal a little bit from that, which is quite nice. So worth considering there. But really, the places where I think he's going to be the best are places that can help give him a little bit more dice consistency. I think he'd be really obnoxious under something like Daredevil Defenders, where he's going to be able to put himself within range 2 of as many characters as physically possible with all that mobility he has. And even just round 1, it's going to make sure he has at least 1 reroll on that first attack. Stuff like Guardians as well, if you can spare the Winging It token for him, he could be really, really good there. Of course, Guardians already has so many amazing splashes, so I don't know if he'd necessarily be the first pick, but it's certainly not bad. Something like Cabal under Red Skull 3, I think he could have a lot of fun there. Being able to basically have Reality Gem, and with that, his odds of doing damage on a 6 dice attack go up pretty well. So you probably build back some of the power that you would need to then be able to transform defensively and still pay for the pay to avoid taking the damage. So pretty solid there. Yeah, I think that's kind of like that's very general. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of places where he's going to do well. I do quite like the idea of him in Web Warriors. Really take that defensive reroll obnoxiousness, bring it up to 11. He's also super fast, so he's going to keep up with them well. Honestly, he kind of feels like a Web Warrior. He has a lot of common abilities with them, and I think he could be a really cool splash there. Not that they're starved for 3 threats either, because they have an excellent selection of 3 threats, but still, if you're looking for another one, I definitely don't hate him there at all. So yeah, I think there's a lot of places he could do well. I mean, I'm not going to rattle them all off, but basically anyone who's giving you any form of reroll, either offensively or defensively, a little bit of health regeneration here and there. He despises stuff like shock as well, so condition removal can be pretty good on him. Throw him in Asgard or something like that, and he can do well there. But yeah, I think as long as you're kind of, generally avoid the power leaderships unless you're going for a very specific synergy with another model. But if you're going for stuff that's either offensive or defensive, I think that can be really, really good for him. So yeah, I think he's a relatively general model and he can go pretty much wherever you feel like running him. So that is going to do it for Ant-Man. Yeah, I don't think I have too much more to say about him. We've talked about some of the characters and types of characters more that he synergizes with. Like I said, it's kind of hard to give a specific list for him because like he doesn't need specific things. The one thing he does appreciate is stuff like rerolls. So other fast models that can keep up with him and help provide him with those rerolls. Stuff like Zemo, I wouldn't hate him with at all. I think he could be really, really good besides Zemo. Then he's getting that reroll. Zemo's going to keep up with him, no problem. You can do a lot of really fun stuff with that. Heck, you could have both of them charging your opponent's same back point if you really want. That could be a lot of fun, actually, if you do that under something like Steve 1, so Zemo can charge turn 1, and then they can both get to the same back point. I think there's a lot of cool things you could do with that. And of course, Zemo goes first, so you get the reroll when Ant-Man gets in. You could do some really nasty things if you wanted. Actually, I might have to try that. That sounds like a lot of fun. But I think that is kind of the general gist here is Ant-Man is a really, really fun model. There's a lot of cool things you can do with him. There's a lot of really fancy turn one things he can do. He's also just hyper mobile. He's going to be wherever the heck he wants to be. He's definitely more of a secure piece than he is an extract piece. He's going to be able to get onto your opponent's secures very, very easily and contest them, and then he's going to be relatively annoying to remove because he has those rerolls. However, of course, the fact that he's going to be dropping extracts left, right, and center means he's not the best carrier for those. It doesn't mean never pick them up with him. There's obviously going to be situations where it's worth it, but do keep in mind that when you drop the extract, your opponent's going to get to choose where that goes. So you got to be somewhat careful about that sort of thing. But anyways, that is all we have to talk about for Mr. Scott Lang today. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. We do character spotlights like these every single week on Wednesdays, and we have battle reports on Sundays. So if you like either of those things, feel free to join in and subscribe. But yeah, let me know down below what your guys' thoughts are on Ant-Man. Do you like running him in specific affiliations with specific models? Are there any synergies or combos that I didn't think of in this video that you guys really like? Let me know down below. I would love to hear what you guys think and where you guys personally have found the most success with Ant-Man. He's a super fun model, so if you haven't got a chance to try him out, I definitely recommend you do, especially if you can play him in one of the places where you can really abuse him, like Sam or something like that. He can be a lot of fun in those types of places. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up here though. So until next time, everybody, have a great day. Peace.